Hello, it's Yubagoon with another video in my Age of Mythology Learn to Triggers Basics series. This time we're going to be covering camera control. So camera cuts, camera tracks, and then this can lead into cinematic mode and a very basic example of a cinematic. So camera control first of all. The very first thing to do is go to Options, Player Options, and make sure that the option Unlock Camera is enabled. Once that's done, if you press Alt, Shift and C, this unlocks the camera and enables you to use advanced camera commands. So now, if I press page down, I move vertically downwards in the Y plane, page up to move vertically up in the Y plane. If I press Control and hold the left arrow, I rotate the camera around a central point. Same with the right arrow as well. If I'm also holding Control and pressing the up and down arrows, I can change the pitch, so looking up at the sky or looking all the way down at the map. If I then use the scroll wheel, I zoom in with my current orientation maintained. For a combination of this, you can do all sorts of awesome camera movements, and we can show these off to the player. So, you've seen me use the camera cut effect in a number of my examples, and you should know what this does by now, is when you press set cut, the current view you have is saved, and if you move away from it and press show, your view goes back to that view. That is what happens to every single player for the camera cut trigger. If you were to loop this, you'd find that the camera would be cutting there continuously, and the player wouldn't be able to move away from it, no matter if they're pressing arrows, if they're rotating, if they're trying to move away, they just won't be able to do it. This can sometimes be useful, because if you want to use advanced options, you can have the camera cut to a certain unit. And there's a few other advanced options there. So I could have the camera cut to a certain unit. What this one does is when my unit moves, the camera moves with it as well. Again, as a player, my camera's locked, I can't do anything here, and interestingly enough, I can't even rotate. The reason for that is because I didn't delete my first camera cut, so this is essentially setting the rotation. If I do remove that, but keep the camera cut object, I'm still being cut to the Arcus, but I have a bit of freedom with being able to rotate the camera while the Arcus is moving, as you can see there. Bear in mind, as I've said before, this will work for all players. If you want individual camera cuts for each player, that's something we need to cover in the intermediate section. Now, the stage up from camera cut is camera tracks. What that is it's a series of camera cuts moving between them smoothly. To access the camera tracks menu, we press this button here, we insert the camera track, and then we treat it like a set camera cut. So we set point 0, we add another point for point 1, we update that, we decide how long we want that track to last, and then we press play to see what happens, and it's that nice smooth panning motion during which all camera movement is locked. In your scenarios, you can use camera tracks, and as soon as that camera track finishes, then the player gets free movement from their camera again. That one wasn't working because I forgot to unloop it. So now we've got the nice smooth camera track, and I can move again after that's finished. You can press the show button here, and you see we've got the cameras and a blue line showing what our camera track does. We don't have to be limited with 2 points though, we can add some more points on, so we've now created a 3 points camera track. If I play this one, you'll find it's a little bit jumpy. We need to think about what this camera track's actually doing. If we were unsure as to what our tracks were, we can double click on a point to see what it is. So updated point 1 and point 2, let's move it over here. That time we've got a bit more of a smooth movement, as you can see here. Now we've got a few values here. Tension is a value from 0 to 1, which determines how straight the camera is going to be. So a very high value here would stop curving. Continuity is a value from -1 to 1, which shows how much of a curve we can get between the 2 points there. So if we make that very low, there's not going to be much of a curve at all. It's just going to go to the first point and then immediately move over, as you can see there, without the curve. If I'm changing that, you can see just by using the minus sign, we can actually visualize what the continuity does here. So this curve by the camera on the second waypoint is being removed on this point. Setting that back to 0, setting that one back to 0 as well, and again you could slightly see what tension does there. It just makes it a bit less freeform, although the curve is still there. Bias does the opposite, it makes it a bit more curvy. So more bias, more curves, it just makes things flow a bit differently, as we can see there. Application of this, of course, it depends on what you want. You could have a rotation camera track, you could have a zoom out camera track. Again, the possibilities are reasonably large. Just be careful, sometimes when you're doing a rotating camera track, AOM can get slightly funky if you try and rotate too much in one iteration between points. The camera gets very jumpy and does that sort of thing. So you'd need to zoom out, see what's happening with this blue line here. You could try and change these values here, but the best thing really is to make sure that you've got plenty of camera waypoints and the transition is smooth. If the camera's trying to turn 180 degrees on the small map, even if you maximize tension and continuity, you're not really going to get that smooth movement that you're aiming for. Now we've covered camera controls, I just want to briefly go over camera cuts in the more advanced setting. I'm going to disable these blue lines. So if I wanted a camera cut here on the gate, but I wanted it perfectly aligned and I wasn't able to do it, what I could do is create a camera track going between the points I want, set it to 1 second, and then I could drag this slider along to give me much more camera control and then position the camera exactly where I want it in order to set the correct camera cut. Now we've covered camera controls, we can talk about cinematics. This is triggered via the cinematic mode effect. You can turn it on or off. You'll recognise this from the Age of Mythology campaign scenarios, where it kind of goes into movie mode, where a player has no control and they watch a movie, a scene, or for custom scenarios, instructions. This is quite handy to force players to watch and listen as to what to do in order to enjoy your map and how certain mechanics work. Just a word of warning, most players' attention span is about 10 seconds, so don't really expect them to read too much and try and keep things as simple as possible. What I'm going to do here is show you a very basic cinematic. So I've got my starting cinematic mode on, I've got the map revealed, I'm going to do a camera track, which is going to pan from here to my character. Cinematic mode creates some black bars at the top and bottom of the screen. If you press this button, you'll be able to see where they go. So I'm only able to see within this red area. So if I start my camera track here, I won't see this Arcus. I'm going to unlock my camera. I'm going to pan down to here as an intermediary point for point 1. And then I'm finally going to rest exactly on my character. Going to make this last for 2 seconds, and that's what the player is going to see. Track 3. Now we can link some triggers. So this one's going to finish after the camera track. You could link it via here to finish after the camera track plays, but this does not work online and will cause out of sync errors. To get around this, we use fire event. This fires immediately, so we need to put a timer condition in here of 2 seconds, and then this effect will play. You can use overlay text in cinematics, but most commonly it's the play dialogue trigger. This creates text at the bottom of the cinematic bar, and what you can do is you can type your character name followed by a colon. That means the character name will appear in yellow and the text will appear as white on a new line. We can also add an icon path there, and that will display nicely. This play dialogue will remain active unless we create another play dialogue that clears it, or unless we finish cinematic mode. If I were to want to clear the dialogue after 3 seconds, I'd do another play dialogue trigger. Sometimes you'll find when you come back to this, text can get imported here, so what I usually do is a space and a colon so nothing shows up. That would clear the dialogue. Alternatively, we could just do cinematic mode off, and that would end the cinematic. When the cinematic mode is off, gameplay resumes, so just remember to set the camera cut to a sensible gameplay angle, otherwise your players are really going to struggle. I'm going to link that trigger as well with fire event. If I wanted a bit more time for the players to read the dialogue, I'd have to increase this timer here. This is why I fire events after every trigger in a chain rather than all at once, because then if I had a long chain, I'd have to change lots of different values all at the same time. One other effect to go through with the cinematic mode is the fade to colour. This is used for scene transitions, and it fades the screen in or out from a certain colour. You choose a colour here, so for example it's black. There's going to be a 1 second fade, and it's going to start after pretty much no delay. So if I now play this scenario, let's see what happens. There we go, back to normal gameplay. Cinematics, you can do so much with them. I've written a fairly detailed guide, which I'm going to link for you on the Steam workshop, a bit more text and pictures illustrating how to make a good cinematic. The ideal cinematic for multiplayer is going to be short, concise and to the point with not too much reading, because the general players just can't handle it these days, unfortunately. Hope that's been useful. Hope to see plenty of decent cinematics online in custom scenarios, and I'll see you again in the next video.